Word of Arslan's collapse spread faster than any official announcement could contain. By the time the sun climbed higher, the entire nation felt as if a shadow had fallen across it. In a small village miles away from the capital, an old radio crackled with breaking news. Farmers froze in the middle of their work, hands trembling as they listened. One of the elders slowly removed his hat, pressing it to his chest. "He saved our water," the man whispered. "We must pray for him now." In the city, office workers stopped typing. Cafes turned off their music. Shop owners lowered their shutters not out of obligation, but out of grief. People gathered in small groups on sidewalks, whispering in worried voices. Is he going to make it? No one knows yet. He's too important to lose. At universities, students pushed tables together, forming circles. Some cried openly. Arslan had funded hundreds of scholarships for youth across the country. They prayed in silence, heads bowed, phones buzzing in their hands as updates kept coming. Mosques filled faster than during holidays. Imams led long, heavy prayers. Mothers brought their children and whispered, "Pray for him like you would pray for your own father." Candles flickered in the corners of churches and temples, where people of every faith gathered, united by one shared fear. On social media, messages poured in by the millions. People changed their profile pictures to Arslan's silhouette. Artists drew portraits of him surrounded by light. Children recorded shaky videos holding signs that said, "We love you, Arslan." Within hours, the hashtag Pray for Arslan was everywhere, on screens, on posters taped to windows, on banners hung from apartment balconies. News channels replayed his speeches on loop. The way he spoke gently yet firmly, how he smiled with kindness even when exhausted, how he promised to use his fame not for himself but for those who had no voice. In the capital, crowds swelled around the hospital. Some people stood silently with candles, some cried quietly, others whispered prayers under their breath. A group of elderly women brought homemade bread and dates, offering them to the families waiting outside. A group of young men formed a human chain to keep the area calm and safe. It didn't feel like a crowd of strangers. It felt like a nation holding one heart. Inside the hospital, Layla saw this through the window. Thousands of people, rich and poor, young and old, standing together, praying for the same man. Her own heart tightened. Arslan had always said people underestimate how much goodness exists in the world. Now, watching them gather for him, she understood what he meant. She pressed her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed not just by fear, but by the powerful, unexpected unity rising outside. And somewhere deep inside the restricted ward, though unconscious, Arslan's heartbeat flickered, ever so slightly stronger. The hours dragged on like a slow, merciless tide. Inside the ICU, the machines, alarms punctuated the heavy silence with a sharp, urgent rhythm. Beeping monitors tracked every heartbeat, every breath, every slight flicker of movement. Doctors moved with precision, their faces masks of concentration, voices low but urgent. "He's not responding to the stimulants," one nurse whispered, her hand hovering over the IV line. "Prepare for intubation," the head doctor ordered, voice firm but tight with tension. "Vitals are deteriorating faster than we anticipated." Layla stayed close to the glass, pressed against it as though proximity alone could reach him. Her breaths came in short, uneven gasps, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Arslan, stay with me. Please, just a little longer," she whispered. Her words were swallowed by the sterile hum of the hospital, yet she spoke as if he could hear every syllable. The doctors worked feverishly, adjusting medication, checking machines, performing calculations, moving from one monitor to another. Every second stretched into an eternity. A single beep, or the pause of a heartbeat, could shift the entire tide of hope in the room. Then, almost imperceptibly, a change. His fingers twitched, slight, tentative, but undeniable. A nurse leaned closer, eyes widening. "Did you see that?" she murmured. The doctor nodded, hardly daring to believe. Layla's hand tightened on the glass. "He's fighting, he's really fighting," she whispered, her voice trembling. Hope sparked in her chest, fragile but persistent. Even in his unconscious state, it was as if Arslan's body responded to the waves of collective faith outside. The prayers, the candles, the murmured names from thousands of voices, somewhere, deep inside, they reached him. A faint pulse strengthened, just slightly, enough for the monitors to show a stabilizing rhythm. The doctors exchanged surprised glances, disbelief flickering in their eyes. Vitals, they're stabilizing, one said, almost inaudibly, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile progress. Layla sank to the floor, relief and exhaustion mixing into tears. You can't leave us, not now, she whispered, her forehead pressed to the cool glass. Outside, the murmur of thousands of prayers seemed to grow louder, though she couldn't hear them clearly. Somewhere beyond the walls of the ICU, the world was holding its breath for him, and somehow, Arslan was responding. The tiny flicker of hope that emerged in that moment was fragile, but it was real. Against every medical expectation, against the merciless ticking of time, he had begun to fight back. The night outside the hospital was unusually still, as if the world itself had paused in anticipation. A soft mist curled along the sidewalks, shimmering under the glow of street lamps, and carried the quiet hum of thousands of prayers whispered across the city. People from every corner of the nation had come, not just fans, but strangers, families, elders, and children, drawn together by a single, unwavering hope. A small group of villagers arrived from a distant province, carrying clay jars filled with water from a sacred spring that Arslan had once saved during a drought. They placed the jars gently near the hospital entrance, bowing their heads in solemn reverence. One of the elders whispered a blessing, his voice low and steady, "May life return to the man who gave so much to all of us." Monks, priests, and imams from different traditions arrived quietly, folding their robes and scarves, taking their places outside the hospital. They formed a circle around the building, murmuring chants and prayers that blended into a strange, beautiful harmony. The scent of incense and flowers drifted through the night air, mingling with the crisp chill and the faint scent of antiseptic from inside. Inside the ICU, Arslan's monitors had begun to stabilize. The faint rhythm of his heartbeat was steadier now, a tentative victory that seemed to echo the faith and devotion outside. Nurses and doctors exchanged glances, disbelief flickering across their faces. "This isn't normal," one muttered. "He's defying everything we expected." Layla, sitting quietly in the corner, felt a warmth spread through her chest. She could sense it, the energy of everyone gathered, the unity of hope, the unspoken promise that they would not let him go. She pressed her hands together and whispered again, "Please, stay with us, Arslan. We need you." A soft movement beneath the blankets drew her attention. His fingers twitched slightly, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself a small, trembling smile. The people outside began to hum softly, their collective prayers almost tangible, and somewhere deep inside the ICU, Arslan's body seemed to respond. The doctors, though careful not to raise false hope, began to see the impossible taking shape. "His vitals, they're improving," the head surgeon said cautiously, almost afraid to speak too loudly. The room, once tense with fear and urgency, held a fragile air of awe. Beyond the hospital walls, candles flickered in the hands of countless citizens. A faint breeze carried whispered prayers through the streets. Somewhere, a child lifted a handmade sign, "We believe in you, Arslan. Come back to us." In that moment, it felt as though the world had become a single heartbeat, a single breath, all focused on him. And though he remained unconscious, the first threads of a miracle were weaving themselves into reality, a promise that life was not yet finished with Arslan Rakhimov. The night outside the hospital was alive in a way the city had never known. A quiet reverence hung over the streets, broken only by the soft murmurs of thousands of voices joined in prayer. People of all ages and faiths had gathered, some holding candles, others clutching photos of Arslan, some kneeling on the pavement, their foreheads pressed to the ground. The air was thick with hope and devotion, a collective heartbeat pulsing in rhythm with the prayers that rose to the heavens. A group of villagers had traveled for hours, carrying jars of water from a sacred spring Arslan had once helped restore during a devastating drought. They placed the jars at the hospital entrance with careful hands, bowing their heads as the elders recited blessings. "May the life of the one who gave so much to all of us return to him," one whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Religious leaders arrived silently, each representing a different faith, imams, priests, monks, and shamans. They formed a quiet circle around the hospital, their voices merging into a soft, continuous chant. The mixture of incense, flowers, and the cold night air created an almost sacred aura around the building. Passers-by slowed, sensing that something extraordinary was happening within those walls. Inside the ICU, Arslan's monitors began showing subtle improvements. His heartbeat, once weak and faltering, now held a steadier rhythm. Nurses and doctors exchanged astonished glances, reluctant to voice their disbelief aloud. "This isn't normal," murmured one nurse, almost afraid to say it too loudly. "He's responding, somehow." Layla sat nearby, exhausted but alert, her fingers clasped in desperate prayer. "Arslan, you have to stay with us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the beeping machines. Her eyes never left his pale, fragile face. And then, almost imperceptibly, a tiny twitch of his fingers stirred hope in her chest. Her heart leapt, but she remained still, afraid to jinx the fragile moment. Outside, the candlelight seemed to glow brighter as if reflecting the energy within. Thousands of voices hummed in unison, their prayers rising like a tide of warmth into the night sky. Children held up handmade signs, simple words written with pure belief. "Come back to us, Arslan. We need you." Inside, the doctors noticed the subtle signs too. His vitals were slowly improving, the pulse more regular, the oxygen saturation creeping upward. The air in the ICU seemed to shift, heavy tension giving way to cautious awe. "It's a miracle," one whispered under his breath, almost afraid to voice it. Outside, the people continued their vigil, unaware that their collective faith and determination were intertwining with the fragile thread of life inside. Somewhere deep within, Arslan's unconscious mind began to stir, touched by the prayers, the hope, and the unwavering belief of a nation united. The impossible was beginning to take shape, and for the first time in many hours, it felt like life itself was winning. The first light of dawn spilled gently through the tall hospital windows, painting the sterile walls with warm golden hues. Inside the ICU, a stillness settled over the room that seemed almost reverent. The monitors beeped steadily now, a soft, rhythmic pulse that signaled what everyone had been praying for. And then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, Arslan's eyelids fluttered. Layla, sitting by his side, stiffened. She held her breath, staring at him, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile moment. His eyes opened just enough to catch the light, then blinked slowly, as though trying to focus on the world around him. He looked around, weak but aware, and a small, tentative smile curved across his pale face. The doctors rushed in, cautious but astonished. "He's waking up," one whispered, almost unable to believe it. They checked the monitors again, adjusted his oxygen, and spoke to him in calm, encouraging tones. "Arslan, can you hear us?" He coughed softly, his voice barely audible, raspy from disuse. "Where am I?" he asked, confusion mingling with the faint awareness of the room. Layla's hands flew to his, gripping them tightly as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You're here, Arslan. You're safe. You're back." Outside the hospital, the crowd, which had been waiting anxiously all night, began to stir. News spread like wildfire. He had opened his eyes. The people erupted in cheers, cries, and prayers of gratitude. Horns honked, church bells rang, and in mosques and temples across the nation, voices lifted in unified celebration. It was as if the entire country exhaled together, relief and joy mingling into a tangible wave of emotion. Children waved handmade banners, their letters shaky but heartfelt. "We prayed for you. You're our hero." Elders wept openly, clasping their hands in thanks, some kneeling in the streets, some hugging strangers as the miracle unfolded. Back in the ICU, Arslan turned his gaze to Layla, weak but full of recognition. "Why are you crying?" he asked, his voice filled with faint humor despite the weakness. "Because we thought we had lost you," she whispered, brushing tears from her cheeks. "The whole nation prayed for you. Everyone loves you. And you're still here." He smiled faintly, the warmth in his eyes returning despite the pallor of his cheeks. I heard them," he said softly. "All of them, praying." Layla pressed her forehead against his hand, overwhelmed with relief. Outside, the crowd's cheers rose higher, echoing through the streets, across neighborhoods, over rivers and hills. News reporters captured the moment, their cameras catching the unthinkable. The man who had inspired millions had returned. In that moment, it wasn't just a recovery. It wasn't just medicine or luck. It was a miracle, a life restored by faith, love, and the relentless hope of an entire nation. Arslan Rakhimov, the beloved icon, had survived, and the world seemed brighter for it. As he closed his eyes briefly, resting, the soft hum of the city outside seemed to whisper in unison, "Welcome back."